What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. The idea of Sony returning to the handheld scene has been very interesting for people, as we've had some reports here and there get out there, but now we have more information around Sony maybe attempting this, and even a job listing that could actually be related to the whole thing, and we'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a sale on the Nintendo Switch eShop that's actually kind of going under the radar right now for several games with some pretty good discounts, and then we'll also be going over Xbox and Game Pass once again, as it appears Call of Duty is heading into the service. It looks like we could also expect some other tiers to head to Game Pass. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you'd like to learn more about that and support the channel further, you can click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with Ghost of Tsushima. Of course, it released on PC through Steam, and there are ways you can see how many people are playing the game with SteamDB, a concurrent player count that gives us an idea as to how it's doing alongside of other recent Sony releases. Well, we can see this is posted up, this over on X. This is from Alejandro, who says, Ghost of Tsushima did it. The game just became the biggest single-player PlayStation debut on the Steam platform, surpassing God of War. We can see it there, 73,546. I mean, just getting past God of War by like less than 20 players, but still, it did technically pass it. The only thing I have with this is Ghost of Tsushima, as it's introduced to Steam, isn't actually a single player only game. There is an entire multiplayer element, but I understand what they're saying. Clearly, the focus for that game for many people who are buying it for the first time or even again is that single player element that I think is very good. I've been playing it on PC. It is extremely well put together port by Nix's. I was playing on a 3080 Ti, getting 130 to 140 frames on 1440p ultra-wide monitor, high settings, the whole thing, and it looks incredible. Also, I played it on the Steam Deck, and I managed to play around with settings to get it at 45 frames locked, which on the 90 hertz OLED also looks really good in motion. So yeah, awesome port, and it makes sense why a game like this that doesn't have any major issues at launch, like Last of Us, would actually do really well, and I recommend checking it out if you haven't. Also, it does look like that Redfall patch will be releasing. We can see this is posted up on their official X account, where they say, thank you for all your supportive messages. We are working to release our final update, Game Update 4. That brings revamped neighborhood and nest systems, single-player pausing, offline mode, and more. We'll provide additional details soon. Thank you all. This is apparently the patch that was referred to when the stories were being told that they were still working on it up until that announcement, and then it was like, okay, who knows what's happening now? But it does seem at least they're going to allow them, that being Microsoft with Arcane Austin, to get this update out the door, I guess, before the end of May, because it is the big May update, and the idea of having offline mode enabled is big, obviously, for the preservation of this game, since otherwise it's just locked to servers and you just have to hope they're still up. Not that I'm necessarily out here saying people need to go play Redfall, but hey, if you're ever curious about it even 10 years from now and they have this offline mode in, at least it'll be there to experience all over again for the less than 1% of people who got the end of game achievement, which, yes, I was there to see that 0.25% pop up when we beat it. Oh, and it looks like we may have the expected release date, or release window, I'll say, for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. This we can see posted up. This is by DBS Hype, saying, according to Bandai Namco official sites, data mine info, Sparking Zero release date seems to be October 1st, 2024. As they mention here, it's not official confirmation, but this is on their website, and the only thing I have with this is it's a Tuesday. That would seem kind of strange, at least now. Back in the day, maybe not, but if you look at the previous Tenkaichi games, they all came out, at least in the US, like the first week of October. So that would make sense technically then. I'm thinking this might just be a placeholder, and it's coming out in October, but it could be, oh, it's coming out the first week of October still. So interesting stuff to keep an eye on here. Something tells me we'll probably find out about this release date over the next month or so, with Summer Game Fest right around the corner. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony potentially returning to the handheld scene after their last unfortunate outing with the Vita. I say unfortunate because when the Vita showed up, technology-wise, it was very impressive. It had an OLED screen back in, 2011? And if you buy an OLED, or the Vita OLED now even, it still feels very current. Well, we have been hearing word now and then that maybe Sony is developing something behind the scenes that would be more than the PlayStation Portal that streams games from your PS5. For example, Moore's Law is Dead did talk about Sony being in discussion and development with AMD for a chip that they would utilize in, we'll just say, the Vita successor, or the Vita 2 at this time. But now we're getting more word around even what this thing would be playing, and a job listing that might be referencing this device. Well, we'll start here. We can see this is posted up. This was noticed by Resetter. Actually, both of these were. And this is from a Russian journalist, Anton Logvinov, and they posted this up in their Telegram, which translated says, "I can confirm that Sony is preparing a new PSP for release. There are only PS4 games in the launch lineup, which are generally available on PC and therefore on Steam Deck. Retail chains are quite skeptical. Either Sony is doing something completely or they are still keeping secrets from their partner." So this is, they're mentioning PS4 games. Now, if Sony showed up with a handheld before the PlayStation 6 generation that we assume is launching in 2028, at least that's the preliminary idea and timetable for it. If it showed up before then, but they said, hey, it's launching and it can play Ghost Tsushima, it can play God of War Ragnarok, it can play Gran Turismo 7. Those are all still PS4 games, just working on this handheld. I think many people out there would say, okay, well, if it's the right price, and that's going to be a big thing. I look at a lot of these portable devices now, these PC handhelds, and they're like $500 plus, right? So I kind of feel like Sony would be in that ballpark as well, and it would probably be the same price as a PlayStation 5, but the PS5 Pro, I would assume, would be more expensive. So maybe it just slots in somewhere in the middle for the price point that Sony has with their then family of systems. But the biggest thing for me with this system, it has to play the same games. Like, if for them to have to develop differently for another system like they did with the Vita, where there were some versions of just console games on there, but other times you had Sony first parties having to create specifically for that device, and you divide them up then, and we saw Sony really couldn't hold up both the PS4 and the Vita, and they rightfully picked the PS4 because that had a ton of momentum, especially after E3 2013 with that Xbox One and Don Matrick. But that brings us to this job listing, which we can see that, again, this posted up over on Reset Era. As they did translate this, they used DeepL to do so. And this job listing is posted up in Tokyo, Japan, and it's from SIE for a system software development. It's for program compatibility system development between different architectures. It says develop systems to enable programs developed for our entertainment game consoles to run on game consoles with different architectures. Specifically, we will enable a large number of games titles developed for PlayStation to run on the new architecture system. This system must be equipped with a mechanism to facilitate defect analysis in the event of problems. Okay, well, what architecture could they be talking about? Well, many people are speculating that this is ARM-based, because remember, we saw Microsoft in those FTC papers kind of outline some very, very, very early plans for them maybe exploring ARM over x86 for their next Xbox platform. Well, if Sony did go the route of a handheld, yeah, they'd probably look to ARM, although AMD has been doing a lot on their side with the PC handheld stuff, where they have their Extreme chips, and those work well, but the battery life still is not there yet. And I think AMD is continuing to work on these chips, obviously, behind the scenes, because they have a large number of customers with these different companies, like your Asus, for example, a Valve, and it does appear that they would be working on the next generation to go alongside the Steam Deck 2. But there's also a chance that Sony might want to work outside of AMD for this handheld. And yes, they would then need compatibility layers for something like this to move from PlayStation 5 or maybe even PS6 over to a handheld. I do want to point out some of the other possibilities just in case. For example, smartphones. We are seeing iPhones now play just outright Resident Evil 4. It's playing Death Stranding and other higher level console quality games. It's possible that Sony does want to continue making that big push for smartphones, and if they can get some of their games, like some of their PlayStation 4 level games, over to smartphones, maybe they'll take a shot at that, or maybe they are starting up development preliminary plans on an all-in-one headset, as opposed to having something like the PSVR 2 that is completely tethered to your PlayStation 5. Again, these are just ideas, things that also could relate to this job listing, but if I had to take a guess and actually bet on it, I do think Sony is working on a new handheld, and for me, that's very exciting because, again, they've always been kind of at that forefront of really pushing technology forward with handhelds, whether it was the PlayStation Portable or the Vita. Again, both of those felt very futuristic at the time, and I would expect another handheld from Sony to be very sleek and sort of still fit in that same mold of providing technology that does feel somewhat futuristic. So it'd be nice to have that in the scene, as everyone is kind of working to push it forward, with handheld gaming being almost at the forefront now, with the Switch really kicking things off with that hybrid. So exciting stuff, but we'll see if Sony has plans to launch this ahead of the PS6, or maybe that's their 2 SKU launch in 2028. Next up, let's talk about Xbox Game Pass and the potential for new tiers being added, specifically for pricing and, yes, also access to certain games. We know there's like Game Pass Core, and they give you a select number of titles to pick from, and then we have Game Pass Ultimate and Game Pass PC, but it does seem like we could be getting other tiers, especially with the inclusion of Call of Duty. Now, this is, we can see posted up, this is by Nate, where he is posting on a few different forums, including Reset Era, and he says changes are coming in the form of pricing and a tier change. And yeah, in this case, I would believe Nate on this one. He's really been on it with Xbox recently, but in this case, most people assume that the pricing would go up with Call of Duty. How does Microsoft pull that off without completely annoying the user base they have now for the service? Well, they could introduce just a more expensive tier that maybe has certain day one games in there. That's kind of the hard thing to figure out, okay? If they do that, and they potentially wall people off from Call of Duty and you have to upgrade to it, that could be kind of tough. Now, there's also the other side of the coin. They could work to introduce cheaper tiers. I've wondered if they could even get Game Pass to be free and have it make sense for them with the number side if they did have ad support. As in, hey, you don't want to pay for Game Pass? That's fine. We're going to show you commercials here and there when we find a good spot that you're just kind of hanging out anyway. For example, you play through a game and it's chapter by chapter. You get done chapter 2 and then you have to wait 3 minutes before you start chapter 3 because they're just going to throw multiple commercials in front of you. And for them, they'd be able to just charge, obviously, partners who want to show you commercials some agreed on rate for ads, and then they can essentially have it make sense for you to not have to pay for Game Pass. Of course, they're just trying to figure out ways to get people into the service. So I think they're going to probably do both sides of it. They'll have a more expensive tier, most likely, but then also have a cheaper tier. And I'm very curious to see if they can get that price down to maybe $5 a month. Could they get it to where it's $0? Then we could see some very interesting numbers for Game Pass that maybe shows much more significant growth. And then, hey, maybe Microsoft will be ready to start talking about Game Pass numbers again. We'll see. Specifically after the showcase, because I feel like the time you start talking about a more expensive service, for example, is after you just threw every possible Call of Duty into it. Next up, let's talk about a sale that is currently running in the Nintendo Switch eShop, and it's actually kind of under the radar. While Nintendo's sales and deals page does have a few of these games in there, these mostly are just kind of scattered throughout the eShop at this time, and they're not really highlighted that well. So I figured, hey, I'd go down a list of them and then also point you in the direction of the search results with just the deals being selected, because there are many others also in there that are like 80 to 90% off. Anyway, we'll scroll through that as I go down some of my selections here. Starting with .hackgu last recode, it is $10. That's marked down from $50, by the way, and that's like a selection or a collection of different .hackgu games, so pretty cool stuff. A Hat in Time, that is $15, marked down from $30. Batten Kaitos 1 and 2 HD Remastered is $30. Marked down from $50. Blossom Tales 1 and 2 are both on sale. We have the first one at $3.74 and the second one at $8.24. Borderlands Legendary Collection is marked down to $10. Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Complete Edition is $10. God Eater 3 marked down to $9.59. We have Klonoa Fantasy Reverie Series at $10. Minecraft Dungeons is marked down to $10. Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom at $10. NBA 2K24 marked down quite heavily, and it makes sense. We're right at just about at the end of the NBA season with the playoffs wrapping up here in a few weeks, really. But that's down to $9 from $60. Ni no Kuni 2 at $9.59. Penny's Big Breakaway, that was $19.79. Red Dead Redemption marked down to $35. Super Dragon Ball Heroes World Mission at $9.59, Sword Art Online Hollow Realization, $4.99, and then Temtem. This, I think, is the lowest it's been on the platform at $17.99. That was marked down from $45. And as I mentioned, there's still hundreds of other games that are on sale. So if you get a chance, look through and drop some suggestions down below in the comments for games people should be checking on, especially if they're discounted heavily. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a new Game Boy that was announced. This is from Neo, who I will admit at one point was putting out handhelds all over the place. Some of them were incredibly expensive, so it was pretty difficult to recommend, especially with things like the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally there on the scene. But this one is pretty interesting because clearly you can see here is a take on the old DMG Game Boy. It's in that vertical orientation. It does have an OLED screen. You can see the D-pad there. There's an analog stick and even a touchpad at the bottom. They just say it's powered by the Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 chip. It's also in the Neo Pocket S from what they're saying. And I'm looking at this thing. It's interesting because it should be the most powerful vertical system, like sort of in that configuration. Even the resolution of the screen is sort of playing into that. With a 1240 by 1080 resolution on that 3.92 inch OLED screen, it's gonna have an interesting aspect ratio for really anything above like N64, PS, I guess technically like PS2, GameCube and stuff, that would still sit in there nicely. So this should be more than enough in terms of power for it to play GameCube, PS2, anything like that to emulate it. But when you get above that, like widescreen comes into play, it would look a little strange there. I do like the back buttons though, as they're kind of slanted downwards. They seem like they would fit in nicely sort of for that grip. So I'm going to keep my eye on this one. I'm curious mostly about the price point at this time with some of the internals that they're discussing here and that OLED display that does seem to be very high quality. I'm not expecting this thing to be cheap necessarily, and at times that can be what puts people off of these Neo handhelds, but we'll see. Still waiting on price point, release date and stuff, but it is at least an interesting take on that DMG Game Boy, especially with a touchpad and a joystick attached. And before we go to the comments of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, if you play Call of Duty, past or present titles, which platform do you play it on? So, okay, 42% were PlayStation. They also have 37% on Xbox, 19% on PC. Look at this, 3% on mobile phone. Hey, I see the Warzone mobile phone players out there, I respect them. But in this case, the PlayStation being the leading platform isn't shocking. That Xbox platform, though, it's not that far behind, and I think Microsoft clearly has the numbers to show that at this point. They bought Activision Blizzard. They know where people are playing Call of Duty now, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see the effect of Call of Duty going into Game Pass when it comes to the amount of people playing Call of Duty. Will more people just kind of try it out then? And what that'll do to Activision's bottom line, because they will talk about the revenue numbers in that regard, but if they show up and say, hey, now there's 10 million more Game Pass subscribers because of Call of Duty, I don't think anyone's really going to say it was a bad move then. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from the Sigma, who says, so not understanding why everyone talks about in-game currency like it's okay or expected for GTA 6, but we demonize everyone else for it. Throw GTA 6 in the same pile. It's even more important to do so given the massive piece of gaming it is. So people are looking at GTA 6 with, obviously, their thoughts on GTA 5 and how that was treated. The online for Grand Theft Auto was absolutely crushed with microtransactions, shark cards, made them a boatload of money, still does now. But that single player for GTA 5 was basically untouched. In terms of the microtransactions or expansion, people were asking for more content that they could buy for the single player, but it just never came. And then we find out later that, yeah, they had some plans for it, but GTA Online made too much money, and that's where they turned their focus to. So I'm curious how the Grand Theft Auto 6 single player is handled, and if they keep microtransactions away from that completely and just focus on the online, because there are many people who just play the single player, and that's all they care about. So to them, it doesn't have microtransactions in it at all, even though GTA Online is absolutely covered in them. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Where's the potential for Sony to re-enter the handheld market? What would you like to see from a new handheld with them? And Would you decide to buy one of those as opposed to a PlayStation 6 if they played the same games? Then also, what about Microsoft maybe adding more tiers for Game Pass? Would you sign up for a cheaper one, or would you go all in on the more expensive model if it had all the Call of Duties and maybe some other benefits thrown in? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.